Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. Well, we're starting a new series today called Change, reflecting on those inflection points or turning points when there's a shift and we have a choice of how we'll respond. And in the series graphic, you might note it's just this big blob of colors fused together, and there's a sort of chaos to it. And change can come with a sense of chaos, and yet there is also a sense of creative potential in that. And in that moment, in those inflection points, those big moments of change, in faith, we have the ability to, through whatever we might experience as chaos, find creative potential and new birth. And so the question as we begin today is, how are you at dealing with change? What are the changes that you embrace and welcome? And what changes do you dread or resist? You know, the difference in your response could be the content or nature of the change itself, but perhaps your underlying approach to it is also a factor. Change can cause fear. It's uncertain. It can feel unstructured and even chaotic with no guarantees of the final outcome. Even if the past or present isn't great, we at least know something about it. We've adapted to that. Even a difficult circumstance can seem more manageable. We all deal with change throughout our lives, and we see that same reality of change reflected through stories of the Bible as well. Famously, in the book of Exodus, God frees his chosen people from slavery in Egypt, and they begin their journey across the desert, but they start to experience hunger and uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, and they say they want to go back to slavery in Egypt. At least there was food there. But of course, they forget that they were hungry there and beaten and oppressed. But at least they knew that place. It was familiar to them. And there's something about the unknown and unfamiliar that tests our spirits. Today, we listen to two additional stories of people in the Bible facing major changes, difficult and even scary circumstances. Jacob is about to face his brother Esau, who he betrayed, and he's not sure if he'll survive the reunion after years of separation. Meanwhile, Jesus and the disciples are shocked by their changing situation following the death of John the Baptist. I want us to reflect on how they respond to their circumstances and invite each of us to consider what wisdom we might find in what we're facing this week. I want to begin with Jacob. This is an amazing story. As I said earlier, the context for it that we heard Cindy read earlier was a reunion between the sons of Isaac, Jacob and Esau. Esau was the older brother and was supposed to inherit his father's blessing, but Jacob tricked his father into blessing him instead, leaving Esau with the leftovers. In fear for his life, he fled, but now years later, he finally has to face his brother as he tries to return to his homeland. Jacob has amassed a family and tribe, and he sends messengers ahead to talk with Esau. And they come back and say, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you. And 400 men are with him. Gulp. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. And he thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, at least the group that is left may escape. He comes up with additional elaborate plans to send everyone ahead of him and to present gifts to his brother in the hopes of reconciling, but he stays behind at the river crossing by himself, and that's where the story we heard earlier picks up from Genesis 32:22. It's a story of Jacob who in the middle of the night encounters a man unwilling to give his name, who wrestles with him until daybreak. And Jacob holds his own. He has the man in his grasp and won't let go, and then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob again replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob." And then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled or striven with God and with humans and have overcome." It turns out Jacob was actually wrestling with God. He desperately wanted a blessing as he faced what might be the end of his life. He's wounded in the hip in the course of the struggle, but he receives the blessing that he was seeking, and he is changed. He even receives a new name, Israel, which in Hebrew means one who strives with God. Jacob shows us an example of faith that confronts change and adversity with an insistent hope and prayer for a blessing. Sometimes when we face troubling change, we may fall back, isolate ourselves, try to go a different direction, or wallow in a sense of doom or grief. Jacob shows us a riskier path. Instead of giving up on God in a situation like that, he engages with God, struggles and strives with God, prays, asking for a blessing. To be clear, Jacob prior to this prays, "O God, my father of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid." You see, Jacob had been blessed. His father had blessed him, and God had blessed him, and he was at once admitting his unworthiness of what he'd received and asking for God to see that blessing through. He shows us how to face change within our spirit with humility and hope and unrelenting trust in God's goodness and promise. Would that kind of approach work for you? As disciples of Jesus, we have been baptized and blessed by God. We've heard the message of God's love and grace. Is that something you can rely on and trust in even as you face change and adversity? The changes you're facing may be personal, related to health, a relationship, work, a sense of inner peace, or you might be preoccupied with the changes happening all around us in our world. Whatever the case, take the story of Jacob home and his example of humble but insistent hope. Seek God's love and blessing and trust in the path ahead if you're wrestling with your own situation. But before I close, I want to bring us to one other story of how someone works their way through change, and that's from the gospel reading for today. Jesus and his disciples are dealing with their own uncertain future as news arrives about Herod's murder of John the Baptist, the prophet and the one who had prepared the way for Jesus. Jesus responds to the news in a similar way to Jacob and how many of us might in the face of a difficult moment of change. He goes away by himself. Matthew says he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Jesus often tries to get time alone to reflect and pray, to recharge, and in this case, grieve and collect himself. But he doesn't get much time to do that because Matthew reports that when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns, and when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. Jesus chooses to respond not with continued isolation, but with action. We hear that he had compassion for them and cured their sick because they were grieving too. He's not the only one. The people of Israel had been drawn to John and saw him as a great prophet. If Herod had killed John, then what is to become of Jesus and all of them? And so Jesus, although burdened by his own grief, has compassion and chooses to be with others in theirs and to bring hope and healing. And then as evening comes, they're in a deserted place and people are without food to eat. And he chooses to keep everyone together instead of sending them into nearby villages to find something to eat. And after his disciples suggest sending them away, Jesus says, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We've got nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. And Jesus says, "Bring them here to me." Facing difficult changes ahead, Jesus turns outward and engages with people. He heals people, he feeds people, and he brings people together. In every age, we will face changes personally and socially, and fears and concerns will always wash over us and give us deep pause. But we have a choice in how we respond. Rather than being shaped and guided by our fears and uncertainties, we can humbly insist on hope and seek blessing like Jacob. And like Jesus, we can offer assistance and nourishment to others. Both took risks and worked through their own inner struggles to bless others and risk building new relationships and belonging. The choices remain the same for us today. May you be guided and shaped by the promise of blessing this week and work for the hope of the world and those around you. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.